Have you ever had a really bad headache where all the pain is just radiating from your forehead? Or perhaps you had an awfully stuffy nose and just felt a lot of pressure around your eyes? Well, these particular areas of the face, around the eyes and the forehead, are where we find some of our paranasal sinuses, which when infected become inflamed and cause us to experience symptoms just like those which I mentioned. Just as their name suggests, we find these sinuses around the nose. So let's just zoom into the face of this image just here. Highlighted in green are these sinuses. A sinus can refer to a number of things, but in this instance, it refers to a space within a bone that is usually lined with a mucous membrane. The forehead in particular houses our frontal sinus, and it is at this level that we will now explore several structures in cross-section. In our tutorial today, we're going to be familiarizing ourselves with the bones, joints, and parts of the brain, and other various structures that can be examined at the level of the frontal sinus. Just to give you a quick overview of our tutorial today, we'll be discussing the frontal sinus, the skull bones and associated joints, the lobes of the brain, and the important sulci and gyri that can be viewed at this level, and finishing off the tutorial, we'll examine several muscles and blood vessels. As we make our way through this tutorial, you'll notice that on each slide, you'll be presented with two images. The image on the left will always be an atlas illustration, while the image on the right will be the cross-sectional image. In this example, the frontal sinus is highlighted in the atlas image, and we can see that same structure highlighted here in the cross-sectional image on the right. To orient ourselves for this tutorial, we're going to begin by talking about what and where the frontal bone is, as this is where we'll also find the frontal sinus. Take a look at the atlas image on the slide. The frontal bone is highlighted in green. This bone contributes to our forehead and roughly the top anterior third of our cranial vault. Now, if we cut this image along the mid-sagittal plane, we end up with a half skull that looks like this. The frontal bone has the frontal sinus within it. Looking in at the cross-section on the right, we see the frontal bone highlighted in green. This area is at the anterior part of the skull, but in cross-section appears as the top of the image. Thus, the bottom of this image will be the posterior portion of the skull. Keep that in mind as we make our way through this tutorial. Now that we know where the frontal bone is, it's easy for us to find the frontal sinus, and we can see it highlighted in green in both of these images. In the atlas image, we can only see the frontal sinus in 2 dimensions, whereas in actuality, the frontal sinus will be going into and out of the plane of this slide. Taking a look at the cross-section to the right, we can see this. The frontal sinus spans the length of the frontal bone. Now that we have an understanding of the level we're looking at, let's begin with the structures that we find within or deep to the skull before moving our way outward towards the skin. Right beneath the bones of the skull, we find a thick layer of connective tissue called the dura mater, highlighted in green in both of these images. The dura mater is one of 3 connective tissue layers that act to suspend and protect the brain within the cranial vault. If we look at the cross-sectional image, we can see how thin the dura mater actually is. And zooming in on the image, we can see how close in proximity the dura mater, highlighted in green, is to the overlying skull bones.
This video is not over yet. Continue watching now the full video at kenhub.com. We have lots more videos like this one available to our premium members on our website, not to mention all the fun quizzes, related articles, and atlas sections. So click on the button in the middle to watch the full-length video and master anatomy.